Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive headfirst into the arcane and often perplexing world of monastic discipline in ancient Tibet. Imagine, if you will, the crisp, thin air of the Himalayas, carrying the distant scent of juniper smoke and the low hum of chanting. You're bundled in thick robes, nestled within the quiet confines of a remote monastery, where the very stones seem to absorb centuries of quiet devotion and, yes, the occasional monastic mischief. The flickering butter lamps cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating vibrant thankers and ancient dust-laden scriptures. Everything feels sacred, hushed, almost impossibly serene. But beneath that tranquil surface, there was a strict, unyielding code, designed to keep these spiritual seekers on the straight and narrow. And if you, a humble monk, dared to stray, well, let's just say your path back to enlightenment might involve some rather peculiar detours. You probably woe and survive this level of quiet contemplation and internal reflection without at least a mild existential crisis. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. From the very earliest days, the bedrock of Tibetan monastic life was an intricate web of vows and precepts, known collectively as the Vinaya. This wasn't some casual suggestion list. It was the absolute legal framework, the spiritual constitution, if you will. It dictated every aspect of a monk's existence, from how they wore their robes to how they interacted with the outside world. Think of it as a comprehensive rulebook that covered everything from the egregious to the incredibly mundane. The primary goal, of course, was to cultivate a pure mind, free from worldly attachments, leading to ultimate enlightenment. This was serious business, not a spiritual hobby. The Gelug school, founded by Jit Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, which eventually became the dominant tradition, was particularly renowned for its emphasis on strict Vinaya adherence. They really doubled down on the discipline, believing that a firm moral foundation was absolutely essential for true spiritual progress. It wasn't about being mean or punitive for its own sake. It was seen as a compassionate act, guiding the individual away from actions that would only lead to further suffering, both for themselves and for others. It's a bit like having really strict parents who just want you to do well in life, even if it means no junk food and early bedtimes. Only in this case, the stakes were a bit higher than just getting into a good university. We're talking about escaping the cycle of rebirth, no pressure. Initially, for minor transgressions, the focus was often on self-correction and confession. A monk might realize they'd slipped up, perhaps gossiped a little too much during tea break, and would then confess their error to an elder monk, or even the entire assembly, during a fortnightly confessional ceremony called the Pasada. This public acknowledgement was meant to cleanse the mind and prevent the negative karma from accumulating. It was less about shame and more about purification, a sort of spiritual reset button. You can almost picture the monk sheepishly admitting, "I may have, just perhaps," implied that Brother Lobsang's butter tea technique was ... suboptimal. The collective hum of understanding, a gentle murmur of Ohm Mahoni Padme Hum, would signify their acceptance and forgiveness. Historians still argue whether the initial emphasis on internal spiritual growth or external communal order played a more significant role in shaping the early Vinaya rules. Was it about fostering individual purity or maintaining the strict hierarchy and cohesion of the monastic community? Perhaps like a perfectly blended cup of butter tea. It was a little bit of both, with the proportions shifting subtly over time and across different monasteries. What's clear is that the groundwork for a highly structured disciplinary system was laid very early on, setting the stage for some truly fascinating and sometimes head-scratching methods of keeping wayward monks in line. So, you've just admitted to perhaps a slight dalliance with gossip, a minor slip of the tongue that might have, inadvertently, cast aspersions on Brother Lobsang's tea-making prowess. Not exactly a cardinal sign, is it? In the grand scheme of things, especially when you consider the more egregious violations of the Vinaya, like say outright theft or Buddha forbid, taking a life such minor infractions were often met with an almost surprisingly gentle approach. It wasn't about immediate heavy-handed punishment. It was about subtle correction, a quiet nudge back onto the path. The goal was always to prevent a small crack from becoming a gaping chasm in a monk's spiritual discipline. Think of it less as a disciplinary hearing and more like a gentle coaching session. For these smaller missteps, the first line of defense was often a private admonishment from a senior monk or your abbot. You'd be called into a quiet room, perhaps over a cup of the very butter tea you might have subtly maligned irony, right? And the elder would calmly, sagely point out your error. There would be no shouting, no finger wagging, just a quiet, firm reminder of the monastic vows and the importance of harmonious community life. It was a bit like your kindly but wise grandparent telling you, "Now, dear, we don't speak ill of others, do we?" These private chats were incredibly common because, let's be honest, even the most devout monk is still human. We all have our off days, our moments of weakness, our minor lapses in judgment. Perhaps you forgot to wash your begging bowl properly after Ames rounds, or maybe you dozed off during a particularly lengthy chanting session. These were the sorts of things that did not warrant public spectacle, but did require a gentle steering. The idea was to nip the problem in the bud before it could take root and blossom into a bigger issue. One fascinating, yet arguably fringe tidbit about these minor corrections involves the subtle use of symbolic gestures. Sometimes, instead of a direct verbal reprimand, a senior monk might employ a symbolic act to convey displeasure. This could be as subtle as avoiding eye contact during a meal, or perhaps subtly rearranging objects in the communal hall in a way that highlighted a monk's untidiness without a single word being spoken. It was a passive-aggressive approach, perhaps, but designed to prompt self-reflection rather than outright confrontation. Imagine finding your carefully stacked pile of scriptures suddenly rearranged into a perfectly symmetrical, yet subtly pointed pyramid. You'd get the message. Historians still argue whether these seemingly minor transgressions, if left unchecked, were genuinely believed to hinder a monk's enlightenment, or if the rigorous emphasis on even small rules was more about maintaining the external order and reputation of the monastery within the wider Tibetan society. Was it about internal spiritual purity or external social perception? It's probably a bit of both, as with most things in monastic life. The integrity of the Sangha, the monastic community, was paramount, and even small deviations could, theoretically, tarnish its image. This gentle approach also fostered a culture of mutual accountability within the monastic community. It wasn't just the elders keeping an eye on the junior monks. Monks were encouraged to gently correct their peers if they noticed a minor slip-up. Of course, this had to be done with immense tact and humility, lest you become the very gossipy monk you were trying to correct. It was a delicate dance of observation and gentle intervention, all aimed at upholding the collective spiritual endeavor. So, next time you see someone accidentally spill their tea, maybe just offer a napkin rather than a lecture. Sometimes, the softest touch is the most effective. You've moved past the quiet whisper of a private admonishment. Perhaps that gentle nudge wasn't quite enough, or perhaps the infraction, while still relatively minor, warranted a slightly more communal approach. This is where the power of the group, the collective conscience of the Sangha, began to exert its influence. We're talking about verbal reprimands, but not in the way you might imagine a modern-day shouting match or a dressing down from a drill sergeant. This was public shaming, yes, but often delivered with a monastic finesse, psychological pressure that could be far more potent than any physical discomfort. Imagine the Posada ceremony, that bi-weekly gathering where monks confessed their missteps. While some confessions were private, others were made before the assembled community. Here, if a monk had repeatedly committed a minor offense, or if the nature of the transgression affected the community more directly, the abbot or a senior lama might choose to issue a verbal reprimand during this public forum. It wouldn't be a tirade. Oh no, that would be far too undignified. Instead, it would be a calm, measured, yet unmistakably firm statement, perhaps delivered with a slight pause before your name was mentioned, letting the tension build in the quiet hall. The weight of this public acknowledgement, the collective gaze of your peers, is often enough to prompt significant self-correction. In a community where spiritual progress and communal harmony were paramount, the thought of being seen as less than diligent, or worse, as someone disrupting the peace, was a powerful deterrent. It's the kind of pressure that makes you suddenly remember every single detail of your forgotten chores, isn't it? The air itself would seem to thicken with unspoken expectation, urging you to realign with the monastic ideals. A quirky tidbit here is how the tone and inflection of the voice played a crucial role. A truly masterful abbot wouldn't need to raise his voice. He could convey profound disappointment, stern correction, or gentle encouragement purely through the subtle shifts in his voice, a slight dip in pitch, a prolonged vowel sound, or a deliberate, meaningful silence. It was an art form, a nuanced performance of disapproval designed to pierce the monk's inner consciousness rather than just sting his ears. You might not even realize you were being reprimanded until you felt that inexplicable prickle of shame, quiet realization that you'd let the community down. Historians still argue whether the primary intent behind these public verbal reprimands was to genuinely reform the individual monk, or if it also served as a very clear and visible warning to others in the assembly. Was it primarily about individual spiritual growth, or about reinforcing the communal norms and preventing widespread disciplinary slippage? It's likely a complex interplay, a sort of dual-purpose mechanism that addressed both the individual's errant path and the collective's need for order. It's like when your teacher calls out one student for talking, but everyone else in the class suddenly sits up straighter. The beauty, and perhaps the terror, of this system was its reliance on internalized shame and a desire for communal approval rather than external brute force. You weren't being beaten. You were being gently, but firmly, pushed to confront your own failings in the mirror of your community's expectations. The whispered criticisms, the subtle glances, palpable sense of collective disappointment, these were the true instruments of correction. It reminds you that sometimes the quietest forms of pressure can be the loudest. The gentle whispers and public nudges haven't quite done the trick, or perhaps the transgression, while not warranting expulsion, signals a deeper internal struggle. A mind that has become too agitated or too attached to worldly distractions. In such cases, the monastic elders might prescribe a rather profound form of corrective action: isolation and meditation. This wasn't just about putting a monk in a corner. It was about stripping away all external stimuli, forcing an encounter with the self, often in conditions that bordered on the ascetic. It was, in essence, solitary confinement, but with a deeply spiritual rather than purely punitive aim. Imagine yourself being led away from the bustling communal halls, the comforting murmur of prayers, the familiar scent of butter tea and incense. You're guided to a small, often unheated cell, or even a remote meditation hut perched precariously on a mountainside. There, you'd be left with minimal provisions, perhaps a simple blanket, a cushion, and a single butter lamp. The door would close, not with a harsh clang, but with a soft thud that echoed the sudden, profound silence. Your only companions would be your thoughts, the relentless Tibetan wind, and the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sky. It sounds like a spa retreat, doesn't it? Except, without the hot stone massage and cucumber water. More like a soul-stirring, potentially terrifying encounter with your own inner demons. The purpose of this isolation was multifold. Firstly, it removed the monk from the very environment that might have contributed to their lapse in discipline. No more gossiping opportunities, no distractions from communal duties, no chance to linger too long over mundane pleasures. Secondly, and more importantly, it forced an intense period of self-reflection and penance. With nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and no one else to talk to, the monk was compelled to confront their actions, their motivations, and the very nature of their mind. It was a rigorous curriculum in introspection, a forced dive into the depths of their own consciousness. You might have found yourself cataloging every single regret, every stray thought, every fleeting desire, until your mind felt like an overstuffed scroll. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit about these isolated retreats is the emphasis placed on the environment itself. Sometimes, a monk might be sent to a cave known for its challenging energy, or a place believed to be frequented by spirits or challenging natural forces. The idea was that the harshness of the environment, combined with the solitude, would amplify the spiritual trial, stripping away any lingering worldly attachments or delusions. It was like going camping, but the wilderness was also meant to teach you a profound lesson about impermanence and detachment. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of such profound isolation was always beneficial for the monk's spiritual growth, or if in some cases it could lead to mental distress or even exacerbate existing issues. Was it a truly compassionate act of spiritual guidance, or a harsh, albeit non-violent form of behavioral modification? It's a nuanced debate, certainly, as the line between beneficial austerity and harmful deprivation can sometimes be blurred, particularly in extreme environments. Despite the potential hardships, many monks emerged from these solitary retreats with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of their vows, and a profound appreciation for the communal life they had temporarily left behind. It was often seen as a crucible, a transformative experience that, while initially daunting, ultimately forged a stronger, more disciplined spiritual practitioner.
Oh.
It reminds you that sometimes the most profound lessons are learned not in crowded classrooms, but in the quiet, challenging wilderness of your own mind. So, you've survived the unsettling quiet of isolation, perhaps even found a new appreciation for the sound of your own breathing. But what happens when the belly rumbles louder than your spiritual aspirations? Welcome to the world of dietary restrictions, where food or the strategic withholding of it became a surprisingly potent tool for discipline and atonement in ancient Tibetan monasteries. This wasn't just about going on a diet. It was about stripping away one of life's most basic comforts to sharpen the mind and humble the spirit. Imagine the typical monastic meal, a simple, nourishing affair, often a hearty stew of barley vegetables, and perhaps a bit of dried yak meat, all washed down with copious amounts of butter tea. It's designed to sustain, not to delight the palate. Now, imagine that even that modest comfort is significantly reduced, or certain elements are entirely removed. For a monk undergoing disciplinary penance, the abbot might prescribe a regimen of fasting, either intermittent or for extended periods. This could mean skipping entire meals, or perhaps being allowed only a meager portion of plain barley flour mixed with water. Suddenly, that bland stew sounds like a 5-star gourmet experience. The rationale behind this was deeply rooted in Buddhist philosophy. Desire, particularly for sensory pleasures like food, is seen as a primary cause of suffering and attachment to the cycle of rebirth. By intentionally depriving the body of a desired comfort, the monk was meant to confront and ultimately weaken these attachments. It was a physical manifestation of the spiritual struggle, a constant reminder of impermanence and the folly of craving. Every pang of hunger, every grumble from the stomach, became a lesson in detachment. It's like when you try to resist that last slice of pizza, but for, enlightenment. Beyond outright fasting, there might also be specific dietary limitations. A monk known for their particular fondness for, say, sweet things, perhaps they kept sneaking bits of dried fruit from the communal stores, the monastic equivalent of raiding the cookie jar, might find themselves restricted to only the most unappetizing, plain fare. This wasn't about being cruel. It was about directly addressing the source of the attachment. Oh, you like the sugary stuff? How about a week of nothing but unseasoned barley porridge? The idea was to make the craving so tedious and unsatisfying that the desire itself would begin to wane. A quirky, almost humorous tidbit about these dietary restrictions is the monastic ingenuity in making bland food even more bland for disciplinary purposes. Stories exist of monks being given gruel so watery or barley flour so coarse that it was nearly inedible, yet they were expected to consume it with equanimity. The ultimate test was not just to eat it, but to eat it without complaint. Recognizing it as a necessary tool for spiritual purification, one can almost picture a monk staring forlornly at a bowl of watery oats, perhaps dreaming of a rogue yak dropping a pat of butter right into their bowl. Historians still argue whether the physical effects of prolonged or severe dietary restrictions sometimes hindered rather than helped a monk's spiritual practice, by leading to weakness, distraction, or even illness. Was the pursuit of ascetic purity always practical, or did it sometimes unintentionally create new obstacles to meditation and study? It's a valid point. It's hard to achieve enlightenment when your stomach is screaming louder than 100 chanting lamas. Ultimately, these dietary penances were about mastering the self, about understanding that true contentment comes not from external gratification, but from internal freedom. It was a potent reminder that the simplest things, when consciously controlled, could become profound teachers. And perhaps, after a few days of gruel, even that subtle scent of juniper smoke would seem like the most exquisite perfume. The rumbling stomach has been silenced, at least for a while, by the stark realities of dietary restriction. Now imagine a different kind of ache, one that settles deep in your muscles. A fatigue born not of deprivation, but of relentless, often monotonous physical exertion. This brings us to physical exertion. Labor as penance. This wasn't about a gentle monastic stroll. It was about demanding physical tasks, often repetitive and arduous, assigned to monks as a profound form of corrective action. It served not only as a punishment, but as a way to humble the ego, purify the body, and instill a deeper sense of diligence. Think of the vast, often remote locations of many Tibetan monasteries. Building and maintaining these spiritual centers was no small feat. It involved quarrying stone, hauling timber from distant forests, cultivating hardy crops in challenging terrain, and constantly maintaining the complex structures in a harsh climate. For a monk whose discipline had faltered, particularly one who might have been prone to laziness or intellectual arrogance, being assigned to the most strenuous and least glamorous tasks was a common form of penance. You might find yourself endlessly grinding grains, hauling heavy buckets of water from a distant stream, or perhaps even carrying massive stones for a new prayer wall, one arduous step at a time. Your robes, usually pristine, would be stained with sweat and dust, a tangible mark of your penitence. The philosophy behind this form of discipline was deeply practical and spiritual. Hard labor literally ground down the ego. It didn't allow for intellectualizing or philosophical debate. It demanded raw physical presence and effort. Every aching muscle, every blistered hand, became a reminder of the monk's transgression and the effort required to atone for it. It was also seen as a way to generate positive karma, transforming negative actions into beneficial contributions to the monastic community. Plus, let's be honest, it probably kept the monks incredibly fit, which is a nice side benefit, isn't it? Perhaps a monastic version of a spiritual gym membership. Quirky and perhaps slightly peculiar tidbit is the concept of silent labor. Sometimes, a monk assigned to physical penance would also be required to perform the task in complete silence, without conversation or even vocalized grunts of effort. This added a layer of intense mindfulness to the physical toil. You weren't just moving rocks. You were moving rocks with every fiber of your being, experiencing the weight, the texture, the rhythm of your breath, all without the distraction of words. It was like a very, very long, silent, and physically demanding meditation session. Imagine trying to explain that to your boss at the end of the day. Historians still argue whether the physical demands of such labor, while spiritually beneficial, sometimes risked injury or long-term health issues for the monks, particularly in a period without modern medical care. Was the spiritual gain always worth the potential physical cost? Or were there instances where the penance became too much of a burden on the body? It's a delicate balance, trying to push someone to their spiritual limits without breaking them physically. Ultimately, labor as penance was about reconnecting the monk with the fundamental realities of existence: effort, perseverance, and contribution. It was a tangible way to literally build back their standing within the community. One heavy stone, one bucket of water, one aching muscle at a time. And by the end of it, you can bet that monk would have a newfound appreciation for every comfortable cushion and every perfectly brewed cup of butter tea. You've endured the sweat and muscle ache of physical labor, perhaps even found a strange kind of peace in the rhythmic grind of it all. But some transgressions, particularly those involving pride, arrogance, or a blatant disregard for communal harmony, required a different kind of corrective pressure: humiliation rituals. These weren't about physical pain, but about stripping away the ego in a public, often symbolic manner. The aim was to foster genuine contrition and remind the monk that their individual identity was subservient to the collective spiritual path. It's a bit like being sent to the principal's office, but instead of just a lecture, you might have to wear a dunce cap shaped like a butter lamp. Imagine a scene within the monastery courtyard during a morning assembly or a communal meal. A monk who had perhaps been boastful or engaged in particularly disruptive behavior might be made to wear a distinctive, perhaps slightly ridiculous garment for a period. This might be an old, patched-up robe or a cap adorned with a specific, symbolic item that subtly pointed to their misdeed, without needing a shouted accusation. Everyone would know, without a word being spoken, what it signified. The weight of those silent, knowing glances from their peers would press down far more heavily than any physical burden. It's like turning up to a black tie event in your pajamas. Everyone notices, and you can practically feel the judgment. Another form of these rituals involved public acts of contrition. This could range from being made to sit in a designated less honorable spot during communal gatherings, to having to perform an act of humble service, like cleaning the latrines or sweeping the most neglected areas of the monastery, all while the other monks went about their daily routines. The key was the visibility. It wasn't enough to feel regret internally. The penitents had to be seen, acknowledging the community's importance in the monk's spiritual journey. It was a tangible way of saying, "I understand my mistake, and I am willing to publicly make amends." A quirky, and perhaps slightly darkly humorous tidbit involves monks being made to carry an unusual symbolic object during their period of penance. For instance, a monk known for being excessively talkative might be made to carry a small, empty birdcage for a day, silently signifying their prior chattering. Or a monk who had been prideful might be required to carry a bundle of very humble, perhaps slightly stinky yak dung, reminding them of their connection to the most basic elements of life. These subtle, visual cues served as a constant, gentle, yet inescapable reminder of their transgression to both the monk and the community. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of such public humiliation, even when intended for positive spiritual growth, sometimes led to lasting feelings of shame or resentment, rather than genuine purification. Was the line between effective humbling and potentially damaging emotional distress always clearly drawn? Or did some monks struggle to fully recover their sense of dignity within the community after such rituals? It's a complex ethical question, balancing spiritual discipline with individual well-being. Ultimately, these humiliation rituals were designed to break down the edifice of ego and self-importance, to bring the monk back to a state of humility and interdependence. It was a stark reminder that true spiritual progress was not a solo endeavor performed in isolation, but a path walked within and supported by the collective wisdom and purity of the Sangha. And after spending a day sweeping up yak dung, you'd probably feel pretty humble yourself. The memory of those subtle, yet stinging, public humiliations still fresh. You might now contemplate a different kind of separation, one that pushes the boundaries of community connection. We move now to symbolic banishment, the monk's temporary exile. This wasn't about stripping a monk of their vows permanently, but rather a temporary yet significant removal from the immediate monastic community. It was a potent message, a spiritual timeout designed to make the monk truly feel the weight of their absence and the value of the home they had, perhaps taken for granted. Imagine yourself being politely, but firmly, asked to leave the monastery grounds. Not forever, but for a prescribed period, perhaps a few days, a week, or even a month, depending on the severity and nature of the transgression. You wouldn't be cast out into the wilderness with nothing. Often you would be given basic provisions and directed to a specific, often remote hermitage or a humble cave dwelling nearby. The key was the separation. No communal meals, no shared chanting, no familiar faces. The vibrant tapestry of monastic life, which had been your entire world, would suddenly be unspooled, leaving you feeling adrift. It's like being told you can't come to your own family dinner, even though you still live in the house. The silence at the dinner table would be deafening. The purpose of this temporary exile was multifaceted. Firstly, it created a stark contrast to the structured, supportive environment of the monastery. Outside, the monk would have to rely solely on their own spiritual resources, confronting solitude and the practicalities of survival in a way that regular monastic life, with its communal support, rarely demanded. Secondly, it served as a powerful reminder of the value of the Sangha. Being apart from the community could make a monk keenly aware of what they had lost, fostering a deeper appreciation for the unity and mutual support that defined monastic life. Absence, as they say, makes the heart grow fonder, even for early morning chants. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit about these temporary exiles involves the concept of pilgrimage as penance. Sometimes, instead of simply being sent to a nearby hermitage, a monk might be directed to undertake a short pilgrimage to a sacred site, often a challenging journey on foot. with a specific number of prostrations or prayers to perform along the way. This transformed the exile from mere isolation into an active, physically demanding spiritual quest designed to purify karma and deepen devotion. Imagine walking for days, perhaps weeks, through the rugged Tibetan landscape, your every step an act of atonement, a silent prayer echoing across the vast emptiness. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of temporary banishment truly stemmed from the physical separation itself, or more from the psychological impact of being cut off from the established spiritual routine and social support network. Was it the solitude that reformed, or the longing for reconnection with the community? It's a debate that touches upon the very nature of human social needs and their interplay with spiritual development. Ultimately, symbolic banishment was a severe, yet fundamentally restorative measure. It was designed not to permanently alienate a monk, but to provide a profound, solitary experience that would reignite their commitment to their vows and their place within the Sangha. By briefly losing their communal home, they were meant to rediscover its true worth. Returning with renewed humility and dedication, ready to fully re-engage with the tapestry of monastic life, Uve felt the sting of temporary exile, the quiet ache of being separated from your monastic home. Now let's pivot from personal discipline to matters of the truly sacred. What happened when a monk, through carelessness or outright defiance, showed disrespect for the very objects that embodied the Buddha's teachings? We're talking about relics and ritual objects profaning the sacred. These weren't mere decorations. They were living symbols, conduits of spiritual power. And any misuse or disrespect was considered a grave offense, demanding a particularly potent form of atonement. Imagine the heart of a Tibetan monastery. Shimmering golden statues of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, ancient thankas depicting deities in mandalas, intricate butter sculptures, and most importantly, sacred texts, or sutras, carefully inscribed on long, narrow leaves wrapped in silk and stored in ornate wooden cases. Then there were the relics, perhaps a piece of bone from a revered lama, or fragments of clothing belonging to a highly enlightened master. These objects weren't just cherished. They were venerated, believed to possess immense spiritual merit and transformative power. To damage one, to use it improperly, or even to treat it with casual indifference, was akin to desecrating the very essence of the Dharma. It's like accidentally spilling tea on your most prized family heirloom, except this heirloom holds the spiritual weight of centuries. The punishment for profaning such objects was often tailored to the nature of the transgression. If a monk had, say, carelessly allowed a sacred text to get wet or damaged, their penance might involve extensive meticulous work to repair and restore other damaged scriptures. This wasn't a quick fix. It was a painstaking process, requiring immense patience and reverence, a tangible act of making amends to the Dharma itself. They would carefully dry pages, rebind loose leaves, and meticulously re-ink faded characters, inked often for days or weeks on end, until their fingers ached and their eyes blurred. A fascinating yet arguably fringed tidbit reveals that in some extreme cases, particularly where the profanation was deemed intentional or highly disrespectful, a monk might be made to perform a lengthy series of prostrations before the very object they had disrespected, or before the main altar of the monastery. This wasn't just a few bends. It could involve hundreds or even thousands of full-body prostrations. Touching their forehead, hands and knees to the ground, an act of ultimate humility and physical devotion. Imagine the sheer physical and mental endurance required. Each prostration, a silent plea for forgiveness, a deep bow to the sanctity they had violated. Historians still argue whether the severity of punishments for profaning sacred objects was primarily about upholding the spiritual sanctity of the items themselves, or if it also served to maintain the institutional power and authority of the monastic hierarchy and its custodians of these valuable treasures. Was it truly about the Dharma, or also about protecting the tangible assets and symbols of power within the monastic system? It's a complex interplay. As spiritual and temporal authority were often deeply intertwined in ancient Tibet, ultimately, these punishments for profaning sacred objects were about realigning the monk's inner reverence with their outward actions. It was a stark lesson that true devotion wasn't just about chanting or meditation. It was about every gesture, every interaction, particularly with the tangible embodiments of the sacred. And after spending countless hours painstakingly repairing a damaged sutra, you'd certainly develop a newfound respect for every single character etched onto those ancient pages. The echoes of profound prostrations, the painstaking restoration of damaged sutras, perhaps even the lingering smell of ancient parchment, still cling to your awareness.
Oh, yes.
You've come to understand that reverence for sacred objects was paramount. But what if the transgression wasn't about damaging a holy item, but about a deeper failing, perhaps a lack of diligence, a wandering mind, or a need for immense spiritual purification? This brings us to sutra copying, the tedious road to redemption. This wasn't a quick penance. It was a grueling, meticulous, and profoundly spiritual task designed to instill patience, focus, and an almost unbearable level of devotion. Imagine the setting: a dimly lit scriptorium, perhaps with the soft glow of butter lamps illuminating your workspace. Before you lies a stack of blank, carefully prepared paper or long-treated wooden blocks for woodblock printing. Your tools are simple: a fine-tipped bamboo pen, a pot of rich, dark ink, and the master text, a revered sutra, perhaps hundreds or even thousands of pages long. Your task? To meticulously, painstakingly copy the entire text, character by character, line by line, ensuring absolute accuracy and beauty of script. Every stroke of the pen, every dip into the inkwell, every turn of the page was an act of profound concentration and spiritual merit. It's like being given the task of rewriting the entire internet by hand, with no spell check. The sheer volume of text involved could be staggering. Some sutras were epic in length, taking months or even years to copy. This wasn't just about penmanship, it was about internalizing the Dharma. As you copied each character, your mind was meant to be entirely focused on its meaning, on the wisdom it conveyed. It was a form of active meditation, transforming the physical act of writing into a deeply spiritual practice. The repetitive nature of the task, the demand for unwavering attention, became a powerful antidote to a scattered mind or a lack of spiritual discipline. You couldn't afford to let your thoughts wander, not when a single misplaced stroke could mar a sacred text and negate hours of effort. A quirky and perhaps slightly obsessive tidbit about sutra copying as penance is the emphasis placed not just on accuracy, but on calligraphic beauty. A monk's handwriting was considered a reflection of their inner state and their devotion. Therefore, a monk undergoing this penance would often be expected to produce calligraphy of exceptional quality, even if their usual hand was less than artistic. This added another layer of painstaking effort, requiring not just mental focus, but also a refined aesthetic sensibility. Imagine having to copy a novel, but it also has to be a work of art. The pressure. Historians still argue whether the extreme tedium and physical strain of prolonged sutra copying sometimes led to superficial adherence rather than genuine spiritual transformation. With monks simply going through the motions to complete the task? Was the sheer length of the penance always conducive to deep insight, or did it sometimes just create a desire for it to be over? It's a valid question, as even the most devout mind can be tested by relentless monotony. Ultimately, sutra copying was a profound act of devotion, humility, and unwavering commitment. It taught patience, precision, and the immense value of the Buddha's teachings. By the time a monk had completed such a task, their hands might be cramped, their eyes tired, but their mind would have been steeped in the Dharma, and their spirit, hopefully, irrevocably purified. It was a long, arduous road, but one meant to lead directly to redemption, one carefully inked character at a time. The quiet scratching of your pen, the meticulous attention to each character of the sutra, has perhaps lulled you into a sense of calm. But now, we're going to shift from the focused warmth of the scriptorium to the biting, unforgiving chill of the high Himalayas. This brings us to cold exposure. Enduring nature as chill is a form of monastic discipline and penance. This wasn't about a cozy winter evening by the fire. It was about intentionally subjecting oneself to extreme cold, pushing the body to its limits, all in the name of spiritual purification and mastery over the physical self. Imagine the wind whistling through gaps in ancient stone walls, the thin air biting at your exposed skin, and the ground beneath you frozen solid. For monks in ancient Tibet, particularly those undergoing severe penance or engaging in advanced tantric practices. Intentionally exposing oneself to the brutal cold was a recognized method for breaking attachments to comfort and developing inner resilience. This could involve meditating for extended periods in unheated rooms, wearing minimal clothing during the depths of winter, or even performing rituals outdoors in freezing temperatures. It's like opting for an ice bath, but instead of just a few minutes, it's a few hours or even days, and the ice bath is the entire outdoors. The logic behind this was profound. The body's natural inclination is towards warmth and comfort. By consciously defying this inclination and embracing the discomfort of cold, the monk was training their mind to detach from sensory cravings and aversion. Every shiver, every numb digit became a lesson in impermanence and the ability to transcend physical sensation through mental fortitude. It was a direct confrontation with the ego's desire for ease, a brutal yet effective way to cultivate inner heat, both literal and metaphorical. This practice was also tied into the concept of tummo, or inner heat meditation, a highly advanced tantric technique for generating warmth from within the body. A quirky and frankly astonishing tidbit is the practice of wet sheet meditation. Monks would reportedly drench themselves in freezing water or wrap themselves in water-soaked sheets, and then meditate outdoors through the night, using tummo to dry the sheets with their body heat. This wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about actively generating warmth from within, a direct demonstration of mind over matter. The idea was that if you could master your body's response to such extreme cold, you could master any other physical or mental obstacle. It makes your morning cold shower seem positively balmy, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the extreme nature of cold exposure, especially practices like wet sheet meditation, sometimes led to permanent physical harm, such as frostbite or debilitating illness, even among highly trained practitioners. Was the pursuit of such rigorous discipline always balanced with a pragmatic understanding of the body's limits? Or were there instances where spiritual aspiration pushed individuals beyond safe boundaries? It's a testament to the incredible human capacity for endurance, but also raises questions about the fine line between asceticism and self-harm. Ultimately, enduring nature's chill was a powerful crucible for spiritual transformation. It was a stark reminder that true freedom lay not in seeking external comforts, but in cultivating an unwavering inner strength that could withstand any external condition. And after a night spent shivering under the vast, star-filled Tibetan sky, you would surely have a newfound appreciation for the simplest warmth and perhaps a slightly blue tint to your lips. You've braved the biting winds and endured the bone-chilling cold, discovering a new depth of inner resilience. Now, as your body yearns for rest, imagine that even this most basic human need is withheld, deliberately, systematically. This brings us to sleep deprivation. The weary monk's ordeal. This wasn't about an accidental late night. It was a calculated disciplinary measure, often prolonged, designed to break down mental resistance, heighten awareness, and push a monk to a state of profound vulnerability where true spiritual insights might emerge. Imagine the deep, dark hours of the monastic night, usually reserved for peaceful slumber after a long day of chanting, study, and labor. But for a monk undergoing this particular penance, sleep was a forbidden luxury. You might be required to remain awake for an entire night, or even for several consecutive nights. Engaging in continuous meditation, chanting, or prostrations, every yawn, every heavy eyelid, every desperate slump of the body was a battle against your own biology. It's like pulling an all-nighter for an exam, but the exam is your very soul, and there's no coffee allowed. The rationale behind sleep deprivation was rooted in the understanding of the mind. When the body is exhausted, the usual mental chatter, the ego's defenses, and the habitual patterns of thought begin to fray and dissolve. In this state of profound fatigue, the monk was believed to become more open to spiritual insights, more susceptible to the teachings, and less able to resist the difficult truths about their own karma and attachments. It was a form of mind-bending, not through drugs, but through sheer, relentless wakefulness. The veil between the conscious and subconscious would thin, potentially revealing hidden aspects of the self. A fascinating and somewhat unnerving tidbit involves the methods used to keep monks awake. While direct physical intervention was rare, subtle psychological tactics were employed. The senior monk might regularly check in on the weary penitent, offering a quiet, penetrating gaze that, without a word, conveyed the expectation of wakefulness. Sometimes the task itself was designed to prevent sleep. Continuous prostrations, standing meditations, or even carefully balancing a small breakable object on one's head during seated meditation. With the threat of public embarrassment if it fell, it sounds like something out of a spiritual boot camp, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the extreme psychological and physiological toll of prolonged sleep deprivation always led to genuine spiritual breakthroughs, or if it sometimes resulted in hallucinations, disorientation, or even long-term mental health issues. Was the potential for deep insight worth the risk of pushing the human mind to such an unstable state? It's a question that highlights the thin line between intense spiritual practice and potential harm, a balance that individual lamas and the monastic hierarchy had to constantly navigate. Ultimately, sleep deprivation as penance was a radical attempt to bypass the conscious mind's ordinary defenses, to open a direct channel to deeper states of awareness and realization. It was a brutal form of self-mastery, a defiant assertion of spiritual will over physical need. And after days of battling the overwhelming urge to sleep, the world itself would take on a dreamlike quality, and the simplest act of closing your eyes would feel like the most profound luxury imaginable. You've wrestled with the profound exhaustion of sleep deprivation, perhaps glimpsing the edges of reality as your mind strained against the demands of wakefulness. Now, imagine a different kind of silence, one that is not merely the absence of sound, but a profound, self-imposed withdrawal from language itself. We're delving into vows of silence, the mute contemplation. This wasn't just about keeping quiet during meditation. It was a formal, often lengthy, disciplinary measure designed to purify speech, cultivate inner peace, and deepen a monk's connection to nonverbal truths. Imagine being in a community where communication, even in its quiet monastic form, is constant. The murmur of prayers, soft rustle of robes, the occasional instruction from an elder. Suddenly, you are cut off from all of it. A monk under a vow of silence would not speak, gesture, or even communicate through writing, except in the most extreme and necessary circumstances, like perhaps if the monastery was on fire, though even then, a very disciplined monk might just point. This wasn't about punishment in the punitive sense, but about profound self-restraint and a radical reshaping of one's interaction with the world. It's like being at a party where everyone else is talking and you're just observing with an internal monologue running at full speed. The purpose of the vow of silence was multi-layered. Firstly, it directly addressed the problem of unskillful speech, gossip, slander, idle chatter, or anything that could create discord or distract from spiritual practice. By silencing the tongue, the monk was forced to become acutely aware of the impulses that drove speech and to cultivate discernment about what truly needed to be expressed. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it was believed to deepen concentration and inner peace. Without the constant outward flow of words, the mind was encouraged to turn inward, to listen more acutely to the subtle nuances of thought and feeling, and to connect with a deeper, non-conceptual understanding of reality. It's a bit like turning off all the background apps on your phone to make the main program run faster. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit about these vows of silence is that sometimes monks were not only forbidden to speak, but also to make any unnecessary sounds. This extended to the way they walked, the way they handled objects, and even their breathing, which was often modulated to be as quiet as possible. The aim was to create an internal and external environment of absolute stillness, a profound resonance with the meditative state. Imagine trying to get through an entire day without making a single audible sound beyond the necessities of life. It's a challenge to even conceive of in our noisy modern world. Historians still argue whether the imposition of strict vows of silence always led to genuine spiritual breakthroughs, or if it sometimes resulted in feelings of isolation, frustration, or even a sense of being disconnected from the communal sangha. Was the enforced quiet always conducive to insight? Or did it occasionally create new psychological hurdles for monks who relied on communication for processing their experiences? It's a question that delves into the very human need for connection and expression, even within a monastic context. Ultimately, Vows of silence were a powerful and radical method for cultivating inner stillness and purifying the mind stream. By relinquishing the power of speech, the monk was meant to discover a deeper form of communication, one that transcended words and connected directly with the silent, unspoken truths of existence. And after a period of profound quiet, even the faintest whisper of the wind through the prayer flags would sound like a symphony. You've experienced the profound stillness of silence, the quiet hum of an unvoiced mind, a truly radical form of self-discipline. Now, let's move from the internal purification of thought and speech to something more tangible, or physical, yet still deeply symbolic. Ritual cleansing, washing away sins. This wasn't about a simple bath. It was about specific acts of physical purification, often performed with symbolic materials designed to cleanse not just the body, but also the mind and accumulated negative karma. Imagine the crisp, cold air of a Tibetan morning. You might be directed to a secluded area near a mountain stream, or perhaps a special ritual basin within the monastery grounds. The water, often icy, would be drawn from a pristine source. The act of washing wasn't a leisurely scrub. It was a deliberate, almost ceremonial process. You might use specific herbal concoctions or consecrated water to wash away not just dirt, but the symbolic impurities of past misdeeds. Every splash, every rub, every drip of water was meant to represent the shedding of negative karma, a tangible act of purification. It's like a spa treatment, but instead of feeling relaxed, you feel cleansed of your spiritual baggage, even if your skin is a bit tingly from the cold. The philosophy behind ritual cleansing is deeply ingrained in many spiritual traditions, and Tibetan Buddhism is no exception. The physical act of purification was seen as mirroring an internal process. Just as water washes away grime from the body, it was believed to wash away defilements from the mind. This was particularly potent for transgressions that involved physical actions, or those that were believed to have left a stain on the monk's spiritual purity. It was a tangible way for the monk to literally feel the process of atonement, to visualize their mistakes being washed away with each drop of water. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit involves the use of sacred substances in the cleansing water. Sometimes, specific herbs known for their purifying properties, or even tiny amounts of blessed substances from highly revered lamas, might be added to the water. In some extreme cases, particularly for very serious transgressions, the ritual might involve bathing in water that had been ritually prepared with ashes or other symbolic elements, making the experience not just cleansing, but also a stark reminder of impermanence and the cycle of death and rebirth. It's a bit more involved than just adding bath salts, wouldn't you say? Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these ritual cleansings was primarily due to the psychological impact of performing a symbolic act of purification, or if there was a genuine belief in the inherent purifying power of the consecrated water and substances themselves. Was it the monk's faith that made the ritual effective, or did the rituals possess an intrinsic, almost magical ability to cleanse karma? This debate delves into the interplay between belief systems, ritual practice, and perceived spiritual efficacy. Ultimately, ritual cleansing was a powerful way for monks to engage with their penance on a physical level, to embody the process of spiritual renewal. It was a reaffirmation of purity, a symbolic shedding of past errors, and a fresh start on the path of enlightenment. And after emerging from the cold, purifying waters, you'd feel not just physically refreshed, but imbued with a sense of clarity, ready to face the world with a newly cleansed spirit. You've been cleansed, both physically and symbolically, the ritual waters washing away more than just dirt. Now, let's consider a moment where there's no hiding. There's no quiet corner for reflection, but rather a direct confrontation with your own wrongdoing before the entire community. This brings us to public confession, atonement before all. This wasn't merely a private admission of guilt. It was a deeply humbling communal act where a monk openly acknowledged their transgression, seeking not just forgiveness but a re-establishment of trust and purity within the Sangha. Imagine the solemnity of the Pasada ceremony, that bi-weekly assembly we touched upon earlier. While some infractions were handled privately, more serious or repeated missteps often necessitated a public confession. You would stand before the gathered assembly of monks, your peers, your teachers, and the abbot. With head bowed or perhaps even prostrated, you would articulate your specific transgression. detailing your actions and expressing your remorse. The air would be thick with anticipation, not of judgment, but of profound attentiveness. It's like stepping onto a stage, not to perform, but to lay bare your deepest vulnerabilities to an audience whose respect you desperately want to regain. The power of public confession lay in its dual function. For the individual monk, it was an incredibly potent act of ego stripping. To openly admit one's failings before those one lives and studies with required immense humility and courage, it forced a complete ownership of the mistake, leaving no room for self-deception or excuses. For the community, it served as a clear reaffirmation of the Vinaya, demonstrating that rules were taken seriously and that transgressions would be addressed even by those who committed them. It also provided an opportunity for the Sangha to collectively reaffirm its commitment to compassion and forgiveness, offering a path to reintegration rather than just ostracization. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit about these public confessions is the emphasis on sincerity of expression beyond mere words. A true confession wasn't just about reciting the facts of the transgression. The monk was expected to convey genuine remorse through their tone of voice, their body language, even the subtle quivering of their breath. The elder monks, seasoned in discerning true contrition, would assess not just what was said, but how it was said. A perfunctory or insincere confession might require further penance, or even a repeat performance, until the genuine spirit of atonement was felt by the assembly. It's not just "I'm sorry," but "I am profoundly sorry, and I want you to know I truly mean it." Historians still argue whether the psychological pressure of public confession, while effective for communal cohesion, sometimes led to monks confessing out of fear of further punishment or social ostracization, rather than solely from genuine spiritual contrition. Was the system always able to distinguish between true remorse and compelled performance? Or did it sometimes inadvertently create a dynamic where outward compliance was prioritized over inner transformation? It's a nuanced ethical consideration that speaks to the complexities of communal living and moral accountability. Ultimately, public confession was a deeply transformative act, designed to mend not just the individual's karmic ledger, but also the fabric of the communal Sangha. It was a powerful reminder that spiritual growth was a shared journey, and that even in failure, there was a path to redemption. Illuminated by the collective compassion of one's peers, and after publicly laying bare your soul, the sense of relief of having lifted a heavy burden must have been truly profound. You've bared your soul in public confession, the weight of your misstep now, hopefully, lightened by the collective acceptance of the Sangha. But for transgressions deemed particularly serious, or perhaps for those who needed a more profound period of spiritual renewal, the path to redemption could extend far beyond the monastery walls. This brings us to forced pilgrimage, the long road back. This wasn't a leisurely spiritual tourism trip. It was an arduous, often solitary journey, undertaken on foot, designed to humble the monk, purify their karma through physical exertion and devotion, and truly reconnect them with the broader landscape of Buddhist practice. Imagine strapping on your meager pack, perhaps with a simple begging bowl and a change of robes, and stepping out of the monastery gates. Your destination? A distant sacred mountain, a revered stupa, or a monastery known for its strict discipline, perhaps hundreds of miles away, across challenging terrain. You wouldn't travel with companions from your own monastery. This was often a solitary penance, relying on the kindness of strangers, the charity of lay practitioners, and your own unwavering spiritual resolve. Every blister, every aching joint, every night spent under the vast, indifferent sky was an offering, a tangible act of atonement. It's like being sent on an incredibly long, very uncomfortable spiritual road trip, where the only entertainment is your own thoughts. The purpose of a forced pilgrimage was multifaceted. Firstly, it detached the monk entirely from their familiar environment and support system, forcing them to rely on their inner resources and the universality of the Dharma. They would encounter different communities, different traditions, and a broader perspective of the Buddhist world, fostering humility and reducing any lingering monastic arrogance. Secondly, the physical hardship and exposure to the elements were believed to purify negative karma. Each step, each prostration along the way, was seen as accumulating merit, chipping away at the weight of past misdeeds. A fascinating, yet arguably fringe Tidbit about these penitential pilgrimages is that sometimes specific, incredibly demanding rituals were prescribed to be performed along the journey. This might include a certain number of full-body prostrations at every single holy site encountered, or even performing a complete prostration every few paces for miles on end, covering vast distances not by walking but by literally prostrating oneself across the land. This level of dedication would transform the entire journey into one continuous, physically brutal, and profoundly spiritual act of devotion. Imagine the sheer willpower required to cover even a mile like that. Your knees would be screaming, but your spirit, hopefully, soaring. Historians still argue whether the extreme physical demands and potential dangers of prolonged solo pilgrimages, particularly in a landscape with limited infrastructure, sometimes led to monks abandoning their vows or even suffering serious harm. Was the spiritual benefit always outweighing the very real risks involved in such an arduous journey? Or were there instances where the penance became too great a burden, leading to unforeseen and tragic outcomes? It's a sobering consideration highlighting the thin line between spiritual aspiration and human vulnerability. Ultimately, forced pilgrimage was a profound and transformative experience. It's designed to push a monk to their absolute limits, both physically and spiritually. By embracing hardship and traversing the sacred landscape, they were meant to return not just cleansed, but reborn, with an unshakable resolve to walk the path of Dharma with renewed humility and unwavering devotion. And after months on the road, the simple sight of your own monastery's prayer flags fluttering in the wind would feel like the most welcoming vision imaginable. You've traversed vast landscapes, your body aching from the long road of pilgrimage, and your spirit hopefully lighter from the arduous journey. Now, we approach a more contentious and rarely employed category of monastic discipline: corporal discipline, the boundaries of pain. While Tibetan Buddhism, in its foundational principles, strongly emphasizes nonviolence, there were extremely rare instances where physical chastisement was used, though always with strict limitations and a clear intention of correction rather than cruelty. This was never a widespread practice, but its occasional presence reveals the ultimate boundaries of monastic authority when other methods failed. Imagine a scene that would be jarringly out of place in the serene image of a monastery. Unlike some other religious traditions, widespread, regular physical beatings were emphatically not a part of mainstream Tibetan monastic life. The emphasis was always on mental and spiritual transformation. However, in exceptionally rare and severe cases, particularly for repeated, unrepentant defiance or grave breaches of the Vinaya that risked corrupting others, a mild form of physical correction might have been employed. This was usually limited to a few light strikes with a small stick, often on the back of the legs or the buttocks, administered by a senior lama or the abbot. It was symbolic, a sharp, momentary shock to the system, intended to literally wake up the monk to the seriousness of their transgression. It's the monastic equivalent of a gentle but firm tap on the shoulder, except the tap is with a stick, and it's less gentle. The crucial distinction here is intent. This was never about inflicting pain for pain's sake, or about venting anger. It was a last resort, a symbolic breaking of stubborn resistance, and always performed within strict, ritualized boundaries. The aim was to disrupt a deep-seated negative pattern, to jar the monk out of their spiritual complacency or rebellion. It was a highly controversial practice, even within the monastic community, often seen as a necessary evil for the most intractable cases, akin to a surgeon performing a painful operation to save a life. A quirky and somewhat chilling tidbit involves the stick of compassion. In some rare accounts, the stick used for such discipline was not just any branch, it might be a specially consecrated stick, perhaps carved with auspicious symbols, or one that had been blessed by revered lamas. This imbued the act, however unpalatable, with a sense of sacred intent, transforming it from a mere physical punishment into a ritualized act of compassionate correction. The idea was that even this physical reminder was delivered with the ultimate aim of leading the monk towards enlightenment, albeit via a rather uncomfortable route. Historians still argue whether even these highly limited and ritualized forms of corporal discipline were truly effective in fostering genuine spiritual change, or if they sometimes instilled fear and resentment, potentially alienating the monk from the very Dharma they were meant to embrace. Was the pain a catalyst for insight, or merely a temporary suppression of undesirable behavior? This debate challenges the very core of what constitutes compassionate action, particularly when it involves physical discomfort. Ultimately, the use of corporal discipline in Tibetan monasteries was a testament to the extreme lengths to which the Sangha might go. In very rare circumstances, to bring a wayward monk back to the path. It underscored the seriousness with which the Vinaya was upheld, and the deep, if sometimes hard to fathom, commitment to guiding every individual towards liberation, even if it meant a moment of discomfort to break a stubborn pattern. It's a reminder that sometimes, even in the most peaceful traditions, the path to enlightenment can have its rough edges. You've considered the rare, fraught instances of corporal discipline, understanding them as an absolute last resort on the boundaries of monastic practice. But what happens when all other measures, the gentle nudges, the public shaming, the isolation, the fasting, the labor, the symbolic banishment, the meticulous copying, the cold, the sleepless nights, the silence, the ritual cleansing, the public confession, and even the arduous pilgrimage have failed? What if a monk's transgression is so grave, so persistent, or so damaging to the very fabric of the Sangha that a permanent separation becomes unavoidable? This brings us to excommunication, the ultimate severance. This was the gravest punishment, stripping a monk of their monastic identity, effectively casting them out of the spiritual family and back into the lay world. Imagine the absolute finality of this moment. A monk facing excommunication would be brought before the assembled monastic community, often in a highly solemn and somber ceremony. Unlike public confession, this was not an opportunity for atonement and reintegration. This was a formal declaration that the monk had irrevocably broken their fundamental vows, perhaps through murder, unchastity, theft, or making false spiritual claims, or had simply proven utterly incorrigible despite all attempts at correction. Their robes, the very symbol of their monastic identity, might be ceremonially removed, or they might be formally stripped of their monastic name. The ties that bound them to the Sangha were severed, utterly and completely. It's like being completely disowned by your family with no hope of return, ever. The purpose of excommunication was multifaceted and profoundly serious. For the individual, it meant losing the protection, guidance, and spiritual merit of the monastic order. They were no longer considered a monk or nun, and all the spiritual and social privileges that came with that status were gone. They were returned to the lay state, often with a heavy karmic burden from their broken vows. For the Sangha, excommunication was a critical act of self-preservation. It protected the purity and integrity of the monastic lineage, preventing a truly destructive individual from corrupting the community or bringing shame upon the Buddhist path. It was a clear statement that certain actions were beyond the pale, and could not be tolerated if the Sangha was to remain a pure vessel for the Dharma. A fascinating, yet arguably fringe tidbit about excommunication is that it was not always entirely permanent in a strictly spiritual sense for the individual. While a monk was formally expelled from that particular monastic lineage and could not easily re-enter it, the path to spiritual progress was theoretically still open to them in the lay world, albeit immensely harder. They could seek a different teacher or dedicate themselves to lay practice. However, the social stigma and the karmic weight of breaking vows were immense, often leading to a life of hardship and regret. It wasn't a "you're out of the club, but here's a VIP pass to the next one" scenario. It was more like "you're out, and good luck finding another club that will even look at you." Historians still argue whether the extreme finality of excommunication, even for grave offenses, always served the ultimate Buddhist goal of compassion, or if it sometimes pushed individuals into deeper despair or greater negative actions. Was there always a balance between protecting the Sangha and providing a path for the individual as spiritual welfare? Or did the needs of the community sometimes decisively outweigh the needs of the individual in these extreme cases? It's a very heavy question, delving into the ultimate purpose of punishment within a compassionate framework. Ultimately, excommunication was the spiritual equivalent of a death sentence for a monastic career. It was a stark and powerful reminder of the weight of one's vows and the absolute seriousness of the commitment to the Dharma. While it was a moment of profound sadness for both the individual and the community, it was deemed a necessary, albeit tragic, step to preserve the integrity and purity of the ancient Buddhist tradition. You've witnessed the somber finality of excommunication, the complete severance of a monk from their spiritual family. But what about those who, through dedicated penance, be it isolation, rigorous labor, the long road of pilgrimage, or a profound public confession, have truly atoned for their lesser misdeeds? For them, the journey wasn't over at the end of the punishment. It was about reintegration challenges, the path to forgiveness. This wasn't an automatic readmission. It was a delicate process of rebuilding trust, reestablishing their place, demonstrating their renewed commitment to the Sangha. Imagine returning to the monastery after a period of intense penance. The familiar sights and sounds might feel both welcoming and profoundly alien. While the community had, in principle, forgiven you upon completion of your prescribed atonement, the reality was often more nuanced. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Your peers, even if they had compassion, might still eye you with a subtle reserve, waiting to see if your reformation was genuine and lasting. The abbot and senior lamas would observe you closely, assessing your diligence, humility, and sincerity in every action. It's a bit like returning to your old job after a long absence. Everyone is happy to see you, but they're also quietly checking if you're still up to scratch. The challenges of reintegration weren't just about regaining the community's trust. They were also internal. The monk themselves might carry the weight of their past transgression, battling self-doubt or lingering shame. They would need to actively demonstrate their renewed commitment through exemplary conduct. This meant being the first to rise for morning prayers, the most diligent in communal duties, the most attentive during teachings, and the most humble in their interactions. Every positive action was a brick laid in the foundation of their renewed standing within the community. A fascinating, yet arguably fringe, tidbit about this reintegration process involves specific minor ritualized acts of reacceptance. For instance, a monk who had completed a serious penance might be given a slightly more arduous, or less desirable communal duty for a period, not as a punishment, but as a symbolic opportunity to serve the Sangha with humility. Or they might be the last to receive their portion during meal rounds, a subtle reminder of their past, but also an opportunity to practice patience and selflessness. These were not shaming acts, but rather carefully calibrated opportunities for demonstrated humility and renewed merit accumulation. It's like being asked to bring the drinks to the party, even though you're a guest, just to show you're a team player. Historians still argue whether the process of reintegration was always truly restorative for the individual monk, or if lingering stigma and the weight of past misdeeds sometimes created an invisible barrier that prevented full and complete acceptance back into the heart of the community. Was forgiveness always absolute, or did the memory of transgression sometimes cast a long shadow over a monk's remaining monastic life? It's a poignant question that touches on the complexities of human nature and the challenges of true spiritual reconciliation. Ultimately, the path to forgiveness and reintegration was as much a part of the disciplinary process as the penance itself. It underscored the Buddhist emphasis on transformation and the belief that even the most wayward individual could find their way back to the path through genuine effort and the compassionate support of the Sangha. And for the monk who successfully navigated these challenges, the sense of belonging, hard-earned and deeply cherished, would have been more profound than ever before. You've witnessed the delicate dance of reintegration, the patient rebuilding of trust within the monastery walls. Now, let us widen our gaze beyond the cloistered world of the monks and consider how the outside world, the lay society's influence, sometimes exerted its own subtle, yet powerful, pressure on monastic disciplinary practices. Monasteries in ancient Tibet weren't entirely insulated bubbles. They were deeply interwoven with the fabric of society, relying on the lay community for support and, in turn, providing spiritual guidance and social services. This interdependency meant that public perception and the expectations of the faithful could significantly shape how monastic discipline was enforced. Imagine a bustling Tibetan village nestled at the foot of a prominent monastery. The villagers revered the monks, offering alms, participating in rituals, and seeking spiritual solace. The moral conduct of the Sangha was seen as paramount, a reflection of the purity of the Dharma itself. If rumors of serious misconduct, monk engaging in theft, violating celibacy vows, or behaving in a manner deemed un-Buddhist reached the ears of the lay community, It could lead to widespread disquiet, a decline in offerings, and a significant loss of faith in the institution. It's like a scandal rocking a beloved charity. Public trust is fragile and hard to regain. This external pressure meant that monastic leaders often felt compelled to address serious transgressions swiftly and visibly. While internal discipline was always primary, the need to maintain the reputation and credibility of the Sangha in the eyes of the lay public was a significant factor. A lenient response to a grave offense could be seen as condoning the behavior. It's potentially undermining the very foundation of lay support and trust that monasteries relied upon for their sustenance. Therefore, punishments, especially for more egregious acts, sometimes needed to be publicly acknowledged to reassure the faithful that order and purity were being maintained. A fascinating yet arguably fringe tidbit reveals that in some instances, particularly in remote areas, the local lay community itself might petition the monastic authorities for action against a particularly wayward monk, or even exert informal pressure through the withholding of resources. There are historical accounts, though rare, of lay communities refusing to provide alms or support to a monastery perceived to be lax in its discipline, effectively forcing the hand of the monastic leadership. This demonstrates a surprising level of agency within the lay community to uphold monastic standards. Imagine a village silently deciding to boycott the local temple until a certain troublesome monk was dealt with. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? Historians still argue whether this external influence sometimes led to disciplinary decisions, being made more for public relations purposes and the maintenance of institutional power, rather than solely for the spiritual benefit and reformation of the individual monk. Was the need to satisfy public expectation always aligned with the deepest compassionate aims of the Dharma, or did it occasionally create a tension between the two? It's a complex dynamic reflecting the real world. Pressures faced by spiritual institutions in maintaining their standing and support. Ultimately, the lay society's influence served as an important, albeit indirect, check on monastic conduct. It reinforced the idea that the Sangha existed not in isolation, but in a symbiotic relationship with the wider world, and that its purity and discipline were essential not just for its own members, but for the spiritual well-being of the entire community that supported it. And just like a good neighbor, the lay community reminded the monks that their actions had consequences, both within and beyond the monastery walls. You've seen how the external gaze of lay society subtly shaped monastic discipline, pushing for accountability and purity. Now let's consider how these intricate systems of correction weren't static. They were living, breathing traditions that adapted and evolved over centuries. This brings us to historical evolution, punishments changing over time. Just as societies transformed and as new spiritual insights emerged, so too did the methods and philosophies behind disciplining wayward monks in ancient Tibet. Imagine tracing the lineage of a monastic institution back through the centuries, observing the subtle shifts in emphasis and approach. In the earliest days, immediately following the introduction of Buddhism to Tibet, the Vinaya rules were often interpreted with a very strict, almost fundamentalist adherence, fresh from their Indian origins. The focus might have been on establishing the foundational norms and rooting out practices that directly contradicted the new spiritual teachings. Punishments might have been more direct, simpler, reflecting a nascent monastic structure. It's like the early days of any new organization, where the rulebook is still being written, or at least interpreted with zealous precision. As Tibetan Buddhism flourished and diversified into various schools in Himalaya, Sakya, Kagu, Gelug, and others, each developed its own nuances in interpreting the Vinaya and applying disciplinary measures. The Gelug school, which we touched upon earlier, became renowned for its particularly rigorous adherence to Vinaya, often emphasizing scholastic debate and strict monastic codes. Other schools might have placed greater emphasis on tantric practices, which, while equally disciplined, sometimes involved different forms of internalized penance or teacher-disciple relationships that dictated unique corrective approaches. So a transgression that might merit one type of penance in a Gelug monastery could be handled differently in a Nyingma one. It's like different universities having different disciplinary codes, all aiming for good behavior but with their own quirks. A fascinating, yet arguably fringe, tidbit about this evolution is the increasing sophistication of psychological interventions over purely physical ones. While early forms might have included more overt public humiliation, or harsh asceticism. Later periods sometimes saw the development of more subtle, nuanced methods designed to address the monk's internal state. This could involve extended periods of deep introspection guided by a master, or assignments specifically tailored to an individual's psychological makeup, aiming to transform their mind from within rather than just modify outward behavior. This suggests a growing understanding of human psychology within the monastic system. Imagine your therapist assigning you a specific type of meditation based on your personality rather than just telling you to clean the kitchen. Historians still argue whether the evolution of disciplinary practices always reflected a deepening spiritual wisdom and compassion, or if some changes were also influenced by shifting political landscapes, the consolidation of monastic power, or external cultural trends. Was the movement towards more nuanced forms of discipline purely a spiritual development? Or did it also reflect the changing needs of institutions trying to manage larger, more complex communities?
It's a complex interplay of spiritual ideals and historical realities.
Ultimately, the changing nature of monastic punishments over time speaks to the dynamic and adaptive quality of Tibetan Buddhism itself. It was a tradition that, while rooted in ancient wisdom, continually sought to refine its methods for guiding individuals towards enlightenment, adjusting its sails to the winds of historical change, while keeping its compass firmly pointed towards ultimate liberation. And just like a river carving its path through the mountains, the flow of discipline adapted, always seeking the most effective route to purification. You've journeyed through the intricate tapestry of Tibetan monastic discipline, observing its evolution from the earliest, stricter interpretations to the more nuanced psychological approaches. Now, as our exploration draws to a close, let's consider the echoes of these ancient practices in the present day. This brings us to modern echoes, legacy of ancient discipline. While monastic life has certainly adapted to the complexities of the 21st century, the foundational principles of purification, humility, and the cultivation of inner peace continue to resonate, subtly influencing contemporary monastic life and even perhaps broader understandings of self-improvement. Imagine a modern Tibetan monastery, whether in exile or within Tibet, navigating a world of smartphones, internet, and global interconnectedness. While the dramatic public humiliations or arduous forced pilgrimages of old are largely things of the past, the core disciplinary values remain. Monks still commit to the Vinaya vows, and transgressions are still addressed, though often through more private counseling-oriented approaches. The emphasis remains on self-correction, confession, and the cultivation of mindfulness in all actions. It's like updating the operating system of an ancient, incredibly powerful computer. The core hardware is still there, but the interface is much smoother. The principle of isolation for meditation still exists, albeit in often less extreme forms. Many monasteries offer retreat centers where monks can undertake solitary meditation periods, sometimes for weeks or months. These are voluntarily undertaken for spiritual advancement. But the underlying purpose to strip away distractions and confront the mind is a direct echo of the disciplinary isolation of old. The idea of going on retreat has even seeped into mainstream wellness culture, a testament to the enduring wisdom of quiet solitude. Fascinating, yet arguably fringe tidbit is the continuation of subtle symbolic penances, often self-imposed, even in modern monastic settings. A monk who feels they have fallen short might voluntarily take on extra communal duties, spend more time cleaning, or engage in a period of intense private prostrations, far beyond what is formally required. This reflects an internalized sense of accountability and a deep respect for the Vinaya, where the ancient impulse to purify oneself through action continues, even without an abbot's direct command. It's like you instinctively tidying up a public space because you feel it's the right thing to do, not because someone told you to. Historians still argue whether the reduction in overt public disciplinary practices in modern monasteries reflects a genuine evolution towards a more compassionate and psychologically informed approach, or if it is partly a concession to the sensitivities of a globalized world and the need to present a more accessible image of Buddhism. Has discipline truly softened, or has it simply become more internalized and less visible to outsiders? This discussion touches on the delicate balance between tradition, adaptation, and public perception in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, the legacy of peculiar punishments for wayward monks in ancient Tibet is not just a collection of historical curiosities. It is a testament to the enduring human quest for spiritual purity and the ingenuity with which communities have sought to guide their members towards enlightenment. The core lessons of humility, self-awareness, detachment from worldly desires, and the profound importance of community continue to inform monastic life. While the methods may have changed, the unwavering commitment to fostering a disciplined mind and a compassionate heart remains the timeless goal. Now, as the day draws to a close, and the last remnants of our journey fade into memory, allow your mind to gently detach from the images and concepts we've explored. Let the intricate details of ancient monastic life soften, blurring into a comforting haze. Feel the subtle pull of gravity, drawing you deeper into your bed, the mattress, a soft cloud beneath you. The complexities of Vinaya, the distant echoes of chanting, the quiet solemnity of hidden mountain monasteries. Let them all recede, like mist, dissolving with the rising sun. There's nothing more to strive for, nothing more to analyze. Just the gentle rhythm of your breath, easing in and out, a constant reassuring presence. Allow your thoughts to become light, feathery, drifting effortlessly, no longer clinging to any particular notion. The stillness around you is a vast, calm ocean, inviting you to simply float, untroubled, completely at peace. Sink deeper, letting go of any lingering tension, any remaining awareness of the world outside your haven. The quiet embrace of sleep awaits, a soft blanket woven from silence and tranquility. Let yourself be carried effortlessly into the profound peace of slumber,